I think we need to start questioning who forgive and forget has really served. Because for a lot of people, especially for those raised around Christianity, this is not just some harmless moral saying. It is actually a deep conditioning. From early childhood, people are taught lines from the Lord's Prayer like, "Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors." And then the message becomes even clearer. If you forgive others, God will forgive you. And if you do not, God will not forgive you either. So, what does that actually teach a child? As I'm studying psychology and also doing my own research, I've realised that it teaches them that forgiveness is not really a free choice. It teaches young children that being a good person means overriding their own pain. And it teaches them that if they do not forgive, they are the one in the wrong, not the person who harmed them. And that is where I think, personally, the problem actually starts. Because once forgiveness gets tied to morality, salvation, and divine approval, it becomes very easy to use it to pressure people into tolerating harm, dropping boundaries, and giving endless chances to people who have done nothing to earn them. Think about narcissistic abuse. And historically, this also did not happen in a vacuum, so it didn't appear from nowhere. Christianity was not created at Nicaea, but once it became legally recognized under the Emperor Constantine and then the official religion of the Roman Empire under Theodosius, doctrine became more formalized and the church became bound up with political power. So over time, church and empire were no longer separate things. Belief, obedience, morality, and power started working together, as we know from history. So when people act like the teachings around forgiveness are purely soft, innocent, and spiritual, just something that Jesus taught us, I think that it ignores the historical reality. These ideas are also developed inside systems that benefited from obedience, conformity, and social control. Think about it. And you can see this still in the afterlife of that conditioning even now. Even in people who are not religious. You do not have to be religious to know about forgive and forget. So how does it show up? Well, it shows up in families. When people say, but she's your mother, or he's your father, or they did their best, or you only get one family. And then things like be the bigger person. Just forgive and move on. Why can't you just move on? But what does that often actually mean in practice? It means forget what they did, stop making people feel uncomfortable, drop your boundaries and let the person who harmed you back in without any accountability or consequences. That's what it really means. And that is not healing. That is pressure. And it actually becomes emotional abuse. Forgive and forget sounds like wisdom. But in practice, it has often been used to pressure people into bypassing their pain, dropping boundaries, and protecting those who cause harm, because ultimately that is what happens. That is especially true in religious abuse, spiritual abuse, family abuse, abusive relationships where forgiveness is framed as a moral duty, even when there has been no accountability or taking responsibility, where there's been no remorse and no genuine repair. For centuries, Christian culture has helped to normalize this so much. The idea that the good person forgives, keeps the peace, turn the other cheek, give endless chances. Even people who are not religious often carry that conditioning because it gets passed down through family systems and wider culture, even if you're not particularly religious yourself. That is why survivors are so often guilt-tripped with phrases like, but she's your mother, or he's your father, or family, they're family, as if that title should excuse harm. And I think this is where people get really confused. When I say I choose not to forgive and forget, I am not saying that I'm sitting in anger or rage or that I have no peace. Quite the opposite. What I am saying is I am no longer willing to minimize what happened or make excuses for it or allow it to keep repeating. And that is the key word. I'm also not saying nobody should ever forgive. That is not what I'm saying. If forgive and forget helps someone find their peace, that is their choice. But forgiveness should be for the person who is healing, the victim, not the free pass for the person who caused harm, and not as an obligation forced on to the survivor. It has to be from personal choice, because forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it's definitely not the same as reconciliation or restored access or pretending the harm didn't happen or that it didn't matter or that it didn't have as much of an impact as it did. So for me, not forgiving and not forgetting can simply mean this: your actions harmed me. They harmed me bad enough that I no longer want you in my life, and you will never ever have access to me again. That's not bitterness. That's protection. That's self-protection and self-love. That is kindness to myself. Because when someone shows you who they are, you have to learn to accept it. If something happens once, yes, sometimes that can be human weakness, a moment, a mistake, a bad day. But when it happens again and again, it is no longer just a mistake. It is a pattern. It is the character of the person. It is not going to change. And this is where I think people misuse forgive and forget. They use it against patterns. They use it to keep people in the cycles of harm. They use it to keep handing out access where there has been no real accountability, where there's been no real change and no real understanding of the damage done, because some people don't want to look at themselves. The problem is the forgiveness without accountability can become a permission for abuse to continue. If someone shows you who they are, you do not owe them a second, third, or 100th chance just because they are related to you or because they've had trauma themselves. Very often it can be minimized, saying, well, they had a bad childhood. Lots of people had a bad childhood. Lots of people have trauma. That does not give them the right to harm others or expect automatic access, sympathy, or absolution. I've had trauma. I don't go doing the same things that's been done to me. Sometimes the only way people learn is by losing the privilege of access to you, your life, your care, your love, your energy, and the benefits you brought. Because sometimes people do not change because there has never been a real consequence for their actions. And sometimes the healthiest outcome actually is not a reunion, but a separation. Sometimes people just have to go their separate ways because they are not compatible. And that can be true in families, in friendships, in romantic relationships, and also in religious communities. Sometimes people simply have to go their separate ways, and there is no way around it. And that's what sometimes we have to accept. So when I say I do not forgive and forget, what I often mean is that I choose peace through distance. I choose to erase the pattern from my life, not erase the memory from my mind, because that's often not possible. That gives me far more peace than letting someone stay in my life and keep hurting me while I am expected to stay kind, understanding and forgiving and accommodating. Because compassion and accountability can and must exist together. You can understand that someone had trauma and still hold the line that they do not get to keep harming you or coming back. You can have empathy for why someone is the way they are and still decide that they are no good for you and they do not get any further access to you anymore, ever again. That is not cruelty. That is maturity. That is what boundaries are. And that is what self-respect is. Okay? And forgetting is not wisdom. Forgetting is not healing. You can't just forget because your body remembers. Your body keeps the score. Sometimes remembering is exactly what protects you. Sometimes remembering is what stops that cycle from repeating. You have to remember this is who that person is. And sometimes remembering is that boundary. It can be part of the wisdom, self-protection, and refusing to go back into the cycles of harm and abuse. So no, I do not believe that survivors owe forgiveness in order to be classed as a morally good person. I do not believe they owe access to people who harmed them, and I definitely do not believe they owe amnesia just because religion, family, or culture says that this is what a so-called good person does. Maybe the real question actually is not that why can't you forgive? Maybe the real question is why are we so uncomfortable with accountability and getting someone to take responsibility for their actions? And for me, the strongest way to put it is this. I choose peace through distance. I choose to erase the pattern from my life, not erase the memory from my mind, because body always keeps the score.